Welcome to the Warship Tactics Podcast, episode 71. Turn and fight or run. I'm your host, Maddminister. In the Warship Tactics Podcast, I discuss tactics and tips to help you improve your World of Warships gameplay. Now let's jump into the action. Turn into every fight. You run, you die. Kara Thrace, Call Sign, Starbuck, Viper Pilot, Commander Air Group, Battlestar Galactica. A simple concept for dogfighting in the void, but in World of Warships fleet-on-fleet surface battles, it's a bit more complicated. Not turning in is not always the best idea, but more times than not, turning into the fight is the right idea. But a lot of things come in together to make that decision. We have to know a lot of things. We have to make a lot of evaluations. But first and foremost, we need to know our ship that we're in. And right after that, we need to know what friendly ships are around us. So let's talk about that turn into the fight. Because a lot of us, what we see in games, and maybe some of us do it, but we see this a lot in games, is as soon as a ship gets spotted, right away it starts turning out and trying to get away, become unspotted. And we see this a lot with battleships first because of their surface detection ranges. They tend to be spotted first, then the cruisers, and then destroyers. So if you sit there and think about that, so why would you go into a battle knowing that the objective is, one of the objectives is to either sink all the enemy ships by using your guns or ramming them if it came down to that? Why then would the first reaction be turn away from the fight? Well, first things that comes to mind is you feel outnumbered. Another thing is maybe you see a ship that you know that your ship is weak against. Think cruiser versus battleship. And battleships, think the battleships that are maybe a lower tier and will have trouble with the main battery of a higher tier battleship. Or maybe you caught a glimpse of a destroyer and you just don't want to be in that situation. And in some of those cases, it's probably could be a good idea to turn away. But there's something we have to think about here. Your ship. Some ships, well, actually all of the high armored surface warships, think the battleships here, the way that World of Warships game mechanics work and the way the ships are shaped and the armor layouts are, is that they can mitigate the most damage when facing their enemy, roughly facing their enemy, angled or whatnot. They lose some of those angles when they turn their stern, the rear of the ship, or the fantail for some of you, toward the enemy as it's more rounded off. And there's less chances of bouncing shells, incoming shells off the rear of the ship. Now I'm speaking armor piercing here for right now. Just think armor piercing. So, and this also, the second thing that you need to think about is when my ship is turned in one direction or another, forward, bow facing the enemy or stern facing the enemy, how much firepower can I bring to bear in that orientation? Well, most battleships up until before you get to the high tiers only have one stern turret, and there's usually their firepower is mostly focused toward the front of the ship. So if you're going to make that decision to turn out or turn in, you need to understand or know what you're trying to accomplish. Because if you have an X turret set up, 2 forward, 1 rear, and you have 3 rifles in each one, if you turn your ship and angle away, well, you've just lost 66% of the firepower of the main battery, unless you run the risk of opening your ship up to use the front batteries in a rear-facing arc. Now, some ships can kind of get away with this if they have the wide enough firing angles, but most of them really don't. They're going to lose one of those front turrets to that rear firing arc, and it's usually the B turret, the one that's closer to the superstructure. It's not going to be able to turn around and get engaged on those targets as sharply as the A turret, and definitely not like the rear ones. So we need to understand that. You need to think about that. So if your objective is to fight a kiting battle moving away from the enemy, you have to know that you're going to be maneuvering your ship to bring the front turrets into action in between the main battery fire that's coming at you from the enemy fleet. Now, when this is a one-on-one engagement or even two-on-one engagement, it can be fairly easy to keep track of that. But when you're facing a furball, when there's 3, 4, 5 different ships, or early on in the game when there's ships all over the map, it can be harder to determine when it's safe to bring the front guns into the action if you've decided to turn away and kite the enemy. So on ships that have, like, there's some German cruisers that actually have, in the lower mid tiers, have 2 turrets in the rear and 1 in the front. Those ships are more set up to that kiting maneuver, that kiting away, as the bulk of their firepower is in the rear of the ship. Easier to maneuver the ship around and keep more guns on target, as 66% of the main battery firepower is on the stern of the ship and not the bow. Those cruisers are designed like that for a reason. And the main reason is those cruisers are really not meant to be in the thick of the fight. They're not meant to be at the front line. They're meant to be supporting ships, the second line, and not really drawing fire historically. But in World of Warships, the good players know that you target cruisers first. Get rid of the supporting ships that are supporting the larger, more heavily armored, but slower firing battleships. Clear out the supporting cast, deal with the battleships last. But let's get into this turn into the fight or turn out of the fight. If you're going to turn out of the fight because you're outnumbered and you make the turn right away, or you recognize it right away to save your ship, say it's 3v1, 4v1, then that's probably a good choice. If you roll into an area of the map and there's already ships spotted on the mini map, and say you count them up, say there's 10 ships spotted. Well, there's only 2 unaccounted for. Are they destroyers? So you need to understand that. So if you see 2 ships in front of you, one's a cruiser, one's a battleship, and you're in a battleship, say you're in a top tier battleship, whatever tier it is, you're a top tier battleship, turning away is probably not the right choice, especially if you turn away while you still have a cruiser or 2 possibly in support, still roughly facing the enemy. In that situation, you should turn into the fight, use the mechanics of the game and also the armor layout and shape of your ship, and mitigate damage and try to kill the enemy first. Try to sink the enemy first, targeting the destroyers, radar cruisers, and then the battleships in that order. You should almost always leave the battleships for last, but there are exceptions. But what we see in game, and I'm not sure, well, actually I know where this comes from, but we're not going to get into that, is right away, nobody wants to be the first person to receive fire. Well, somebody has to be that person in every game. As long as you're actively maneuvering, changing throttle, changing your heading, on a non-pattern, being unpredictable, as long as you're doing that, you're going to make yourself a harder target. So even if there's ships shooting at you, as long as you keep maneuvering just a little bit, playing with the throttle, you're not going to give up clean shots. And if you're in those, battleships that can have the health pool and the heals and the armor to kind of deal with that incoming fire, then you might want to turn into the battle, face the enemy, and if it comes down to it, another tactic we see, you can always slow down and maybe even reverse a little bit, keeping the ship orientated in a direction that it can better mitigate incoming fire. Speaking armor piercing. Now, high explosive ammunition being fired at you is another story in any ship. But the upside to high explosive ammunition is it doesn't matter if you're facing them or moving away from them, you're still having the same risks. The other good thing about high explosive ammunition when it comes to the fires is you can heal it all back. Unlike armor piercing penetrations, you cannot heal all of that back. You have to know that and understand that. So most of the time you want to turn into those fights. Now let's talk about the cruisers a little bit. Cruisers are kind of a mixed bag when it comes to this. Some heavy cruisers in certain tiers, when they're top tier, have the ability to bow tank a little bit as long as you understand your ship. Remember, I'm talking to heavy cruisers here, as they tend to have a little better armor schemes than the light cruisers, although the term doesn't refer to their armor, it refers to their gun caliber. But the larger, heavier ships tend to have better armor schemes. If you're in one of those cruisers that has the ability to somewhat bow tank other cruisers or even some battleships with the lower caliber guns, turning into them may be the better thing to do and take advantage of your rate of fire. Now, the ships that have the light cruisers mostly and some of the heavy cruisers with the 203 millimeter guns have thin armor schemes. A lot of the time you want to break contact, but still you need to think about that also. How did I get spotted? When did I get spotted? Was it a surface ship that spotted me? Was I only spotted after I fired my main battery guns? Because if that's the case, if you know it was another cruiser or a battleship that spotted you, or you know you got spotted the second you fired your guns and you're going, oh no, I need to disengage. Well, turning at that point, because you're in a thinly armored ship or less armored than a battleship, is probably going to be a bad idea. In that case, wait the 20 seconds out till your gun bloom goes back to your normal surface detection range and then turn away, then disengage. Don't do it right away. That is being smart about that decision. You're making a tactical choice based off of knowledge of the game mechanics, and knowledge of your ship and its surface detection range. Now, if you're in open water and you see ships that are outside of your surface detection range and you're spotted, well, right away, you know it's a destroyer unless there's aircraft nearby. In that situation, you need to pay attention to your priority target indicator. I don't think some people really pay attention to that as much as they should. The downside to that is this, is when you're targeted by a torpedo system, your priority target indicator is not going to let you know that. But what you can pay attention to are 10, 10, 10 quick changes, and you only see one ship here and there, probably a destroyer flipping back and forth between its guns and its torpedo systems. Just keep that in mind. And that is actually another instance of when you need to make that decision of to turn into the fight or turn away from the fight. And that comes again with knowledge of what destroyers you're facing, what kind they are, how many torpedo launchers do they have, and roughly what their range is. Now you can get real detailed and understand what their reload times are based on different builds, but that's a lot of things to kind of pay attention to. And I have a feeling that that's probably too much for a lot of players, or it's just too much. It's information overload. So what I think what we should concentrate on are what kind of destroyer it is, meaning where it likes the range it needs to operate in, how many launchers it have, and whether it has standard or deep water torpedoes. So that can make that knowing that information is when you turn out or turn into the fight. So the part about turning away when we're talking about surface engagements now, because we're going to talk about torpedo attacks and we're definitely going to talk about torpedo bombers. We're going to get to that. But turning away from the fight and getting in your head that I just want to disengage. I'm going to turn away. I'm going to not use my main battery. I'm going to let my surface detection range stay at its best it can be. And I'm just going to go full throttle, maybe zigzag a little bit, and just try to break contact, drop off detection, then, relocate, find another position, get your ship orientated in a more advantageous position, and then re-engage on your terms. If you just turn and run in a straight line, even the players with have the worst gunnery skills are going to eventually dial those shots in. If you keep firing your main battery guns and you're just kind of running away in a straight line, you're making it easier for them to hit you, not only the ships behind you, but the ships that may be off to your starboard side, your right side, or your port side, which is your left side, if you're not paying attention to the whole mini-map of what's going on, and you're going to make yourself an easy target, especially if you're just moving at a constant speed and a constant heading, and you're using your guns to maintain your gun bloom so everybody that's in your gun range can spot you. I would consider that a case of running and making it easy for the enemy team to sink your ship, or in case of the quote, you run and you die, because that is a running situation. If you're kiting away and you're using your guns. There's a difference here. Kiting, you're actively playing with the throttle. You're intentionally trying to leave one or two ships at the maximum gun range of your ship, playing with the throttle, maneuvering the ship around to avoid incoming fire with the full intention of kiting them closer to your friendly ships while doing damage at them, because that's in the type of ship that you're good at. Think Russian destroyers, think Russian cruisers, French cruisers, not too much the Americans because of the lofty gun arcs and their shorter gun ranges, but some of the high tier cruisers can do that. Des Moines is definitely capable of doing that when you're talking about U.S. Navy. Some of the Royal Navy cruisers, not so much because of their shorter range, but can be done if you're really comfortable with that. So kiting is not, I don't consider kiting running, because kiting is you're taking advantage of your ship's armor, your ship's maneuverability, and your skills in hitting targets moving at you when they're at max gun range, or even just slightly outside of maximum main battery range. So that's not running. Running is going in a straight line and just making it easy for the enemy to track you. In that case, you're kind of just giving your ship up. Destroyers are a little bit more of a mixed bag when it comes to that, because some destroyers just want to get into a knife fight, period. They want to get within 5, 6, 7, 8 kilometers and knife fight with another destroyer and just put them down as fast as possible and kind of just ignore everything around them. That's just how the life of some destroyers are, the gunboat destroyers. Other destroyers, I think the Japanese, they really don't want to be seen. They never want to be, the torpedo boats anyway, don't want to be seen. So they're going to go about this a different way. They're going to stay on the peripheries of the fleets. They're going to stay outside of their surface detection ranges most of the time, but they still need to make the decisions of when to turn in and fight, which in our cases means turn in to set up a torpedo attack, and then turn away and not run, but relocate. But if those Japanese torpedo boats stumble into a gunboat and get into a gunfight, you need to consciously make the decision. Should I shoot back? Am I far enough away from this other destroyer and use my speed and stealth to slip out of detection? Or do I use my main battery and cause my gun bloom to make it where I have to move farther to break contact? Or maybe pop your smoke screen and break contact that way. In that case, I would consider, if you use the smoke screen in defensive posture like that, that's not really running, that's saving your ship. But if you just decide you're going to try to kite away in a Japanese torpedo boat, that's kind of running. And again, you're kind of making yourself an easy target, because everybody's going to shoot at you in that case. Because one, you're not that dangerous by only using maybe half your firepower on gun systems that tend to be weaker than the rest of the destroyers in the game anyway. So they have a different mentality. Those players, or those of you that play those destroyers, those Japanese torpedo boats, have a different mentality and a different thought process and checklist you need to go down to, whether I'm going to turn in a fight or turn away and kite away, or just break contact, get out of there, save the ship, and come back under your own terms. Now, the thing that we still see, what that I see a lot is when it comes to dealing with torpedoes. I'm going to say right now, 90% of the time, you're going to want to turn into a potential or known torpedo attack for a few reasons. One, your ship is if it's already pointed somewhat in that direction, is going to be moving faster. Your rudder is going to bite sooner and harder. You're going to be a little more maneuverable, as opposed to trying to make a 180-degree turn or a 160 or a 140-degree turn. And except for Royal Navy cruisers and destroyers, you're going to bleed a lot of speed in the turn. You're going to slow down. You're going to have less maneuverability, and you're more likely to catch torpedoes on the stern, which in this case exposes your steering gears, which can make it even worse. If you take a torpedo on the nose or the stern, it's guaranteed flooding off of the torpedo bulges. But if you take one on the bow, all you get is a damage. You get flood. You stop the flood, heal up some of that damage done, and you get back to maneuvering. If you take a torpedo in the stern, you run the risk of losing the steering gears. So not only do you get the flood, but you lose the steering gear. Even in that instance where you have to fix the flood, you're actually going to be stuck in a turn, and you may overturn and clip another torpedo. Or if you're trying to minimize how many torpedoes you take, you say, I'm going to take this one on the stern because I might hit another one. And most of us know that I'm not going to hit damage control and slide. No, I'm not going to hit another torpedo, although there is an immunity time in there. But say your timing's off, you hit it, boom, and then maybe you clip another torpedo because you caught a torpedo on the stern from one set of torpedoes from that destroyer. You fix your rudder because you have to, because you don't want to be stuck in a turn, or you don't fix the rudder and you're stuck in a turn and then catch 3 or 4 more torpedoes. In that case, it would have been most likely safer to turn into a known or potential torpedo attack from a destroyer. Now, the destroyers can be hard to deal with because we kind of know when they're there, but we kind of not know when they're there. The one thing that you know where it's coming from, where it's at, exactly what angle it's coming into, are torpedo bombers. And torpedo bombers, you see it all the time. If you watch YouTube videos, I suggest you watch YouTube videos of some of the high skill aircraft carrier players. Well, I'll use Farazella as an example. If you watch his videos or maybe listen to his streams here and there, you will constantly hear him say that ship should turn into those torpedoes. That ship should turn into those torpedoes. That ship should turn into those torpedoes. And there's a reason why. With torpedo bombers, if you catch it fast enough, and maybe that aircraft carrier player is not as super high skilled, you can turn into them and possibly get to the drop point and reach the torpedoes before they arm. I've done that many a times by being aggressive and turning right into them. That is a high probability, especially if you understand that they have that distance where they hit the water and they have a minimum arming distance. It's pretty big. And if you're quick and you turn into them right away, hard, full speed, you have a chance of getting to them before they arm, taking a strike, no damage, move on, and here we go. And now we're talking about maybe a torpedo attack from one side of your ship by, say, one group. Even if it's 2 groups, you present yourself as a thinner target, you have a chance to find a gap or maybe only take 1 torpedo as opposed to taking 3 or 4. When there's a cross drop going on, or you have those high tier aircraft carriers with 3 torpedo bomber groups, this is when you need to really pay attention to what's going on. For the high skill players and even some of the medium to high skill players, you'll see the torpedo groups come in, a group of 2 and a group of 1, and they're going to try to cross drop you. So you need to know right away, if I'm in this cross drop in my ship and I see 2 coming from one side and 1 coming from the other side, and it's a cross drop, you need to turn into the double torpedo group. No questions asked. Turn into it. Yeah, you may take a torpedo strike from a single group. Would you rather take 2 torpedo strikes from one torpedo bomber group, or would you rather take 4 from the double torpedo bomber group? That's a no-brainer right there. There's nothing to talk about in that. And we need to understand that. We need to know that. Even then, you have a chance of splitting the torpedoes and maybe only taking 1 from that single torpedo group. I've been recently watching a lot of the high-tier aircraft carriers play. Kind of been just almost like a nostalgia thing, because I know it's coming to an end. They're going to change it. We're going to have to all figure out how to deal with the way the aircraft carriers are going to be played when the aircraft carrier rework finally hits test server and then live server, because it's coming. And I'm watching them and I'm sitting there going, I don't even play aircraft carriers, and I know to always turn into those torpedo bombers. I've been in mid-tier games in destroyers where I've actually gone in circles, like did a complete 360 turning at torpedo bombers, and the player is rotating with me, finally decides to drop them behind a turn, and I just simply turn away from them. Instead of them just, okay, if you don't understand how to drop that with a destroyer doing that, just go find another target. And in those instances as a destroyer driver, you just need to go, I need to avoid those torpedo bombers, and just, hey, if somebody gets a lucky shot on me, RNG happens. but I always turn into them unless it's going to ground me. So that's something else you need to keep in your mind. Will this turn me right into an island? If you're gonna manage to miss all the torpedo drops, then okay, ground yourself. Tactical, what do you call that? A tactical notzer. But that needs to be known also. But 9 out of 10 times, or 90% of the times, you're gonna want to turn into those torpedo bombers in nearly every ship. And the other thing I'm going to tell you not to do is especially in the not so fast ships, if you get dropped in that V pattern from behind, you still need to turn into that, because if you don't turn into it, you run the risk of getting hit by 3, 4, 5 torpedoes when that V comes together. If you intentionally turn into one side of it and you know you're going to hit a torpedo, you take one torpedo, you line yourself up with the direction of the V coming the other way, and you miss them. Guess what? I would rather just take 1 than 4. I don't know about some of you, but that's a good trade for me. 1 torpedo strike or 4 torpedo strikes. Some of those ships won't survive 4 torpedo strikes. That's a case of turning into the fight, which is, in that case, the torpedo bombers in that aircraft carrier having that strike on you. That's turning into it, as opposed to running straight away and trying to outrun it. In that case, you're probably going to lose the ship. You're probably going to take multiple hits and lose a ship outright. In that case, you decided to run and you died. Your ship was lost. There's a lot of instances around there that we need to keep in our head of when to turn into the fights. And don't get confused with turning into fights, meaning I'm turning into another ship to do a gun-on-gun engagement. Sometimes it's just turning into a ship that's facing in one direction, say off to your starboard side, but using your guns on a ship that's off to the port side. In that case, you turned into a threat, turned into the fight, but decided to use your guns to another ship that is presenting a better target, as opposed to the one that you're angling against. And that can be done not only by battleships, but by cruisers also. Cruiser drivers, you need to understand that turning into that is safer most of the time than it is staying broadside onto something or turning away from it and opening up your ship. And one more thing I want to talk about that I think players don't really think about, and this has mostly to do with battleships, but some cruisers suffer from this also. So we'll talk about battleships first. A lot of the battleships in the game these days, especially the high tier battleships, have their citadels below the waterline. Makes them hard to hit. And the belt armor is usually right at the waterline. So think about this. If you're going into a fight and you're going full speed and you go, let me turn away from this fight, and you've kind of lost track of where you're at on the map and how the mini map is at, sometimes you can start to turn hard. The ship will actually list to the outside of the turn, lifting the citadel out of the water on one side of the ship. And if you have enemies on that side of the map, you're actually exposing your citadel more to incoming fire in that little window that you have when you started turning the ship hard. Especially if you're in a map and you're kind of facing an angle to one edge or the other, and then you decide to turn away, you open up your ship and there's 3 or 4 other ships on the other side of the map, or the other half of the map, or the other third of the map. You actually raise your citadel up out of the water, raise the belt armor up out of the water, and expose the thin armor underneath, and an easy punch through to your citadel. In that case, there's even low caliber cruiser guns and destroyer guns that can get into it if you do that to your ship. And I don't think a lot of players really understand that. Yeah, you're going to dip the outside facing them down lower, and the belt armor will probably still be above the water, and you'll create an angle for the ship that you're turning away from. But if you didn't really plan that turn out, you may actually inadvertently expose your ship citadel to a threat that you didn't quite understand. And some cruisers actually have that happen too. And with cruisers, it's even worse because most of their citadels are a little bit above the water. And their belt armor, 1, is not that thick to begin with. And 2, the armor below the belt armor, which is the hull of the ship, is even thinner than battleship armor. And then the citadel armor on most of the cruisers is nearly as thin as the superstructure armor in some cases. And if you do a hard turn that way, you're going to raise that citadel up out of the water even higher, making it even easier for you to take citadel damage from even lower caliber guns. Think like 100 millimeter guns, 127 armor piercing from destroyers. And I've seen chat in games, and I've seen games where the chat goes up, goes, how did that ship citadel me? How did you citadel me with 127 millimeter in their cruisers? And I actually had one recently. I remember reading it, and I was looking at it going, that guy doesn't realize that he lifted the inside of his ship out of the water trying to avoid this ship, had an enemy ship on the other side, and just took advantage of it. Now, whether that other ship realized that or not, I don't know. But just where you normally aim at anyway, the mechanics just handled themselves. So turning into every fight, turning away from a fight, sometimes it's not as cut as dry as it seems to be. And we need to really think through when we turn and why we turn. Sometimes it's better just to turn into the fight and fight it out. Sometimes you just have to outplay or outgun the other player. That's all there is to talk about. Sometimes you're just in that situation. You need to, we need to learn when we just need to fight it out. Sometimes it's just better to mitigate as much damage as possible, outplay the other person, manage your health pool better than they do, and win the engagement and move on to the next fight with 50% of your health left. As long as a ship gets sunk, it's a win for you in that small tactical engagement. Now, how that works out the rest of the game based on the rest of your team, that's a whole nother story. We're talking about the ship that we're in at that particular time and trying to protect it as good as we can. So with that being said, the next time you go out, and me too, we go out there and right away we see something that might be a bad situation, before you hit that throttle, before you hit your rudder hard over to one side or the other, don't care which it is, think about what you're about to expose when you make that maneuver, because it may not be a good choice. Sometimes taking a single torpedo on the nose is what you need to do. Sometimes trying to bounce armor piercing ammunition off of your side belt armor is a thing you need to do. Because yes, one more thing about that, almost forgot. Just because you're facing a Yamato, if he doesn't hit the nose armor of your battleship and even glances the belt armor, the side of your ship, it's going to bounce. It can only overmatch 32 millimeters of armor. Anything past that, which is belt armor, the thicker deck armors, anything 40 millimeters, all that stuff is going to bounce even Yamato armor piercing shells. Just remember that. I had a game where a Yamato player was complaining that a ship was bouncing all of its AP, and they didn't understand how the mechanic worked. So before we make the decision to turn in or turn out, most of the time, I'm going to say it right now, I could be right, I could be wrong. This is actually a debatable topic. I would love to see some of your guys' opinions on the webpage or maybe on my Facebook gaming page, whether you prefer to turn into the fight most of the time, or do you think turning out is the best idea, at that given time. So either way, whatever decision it is you decide to make, at least think about it. And if it happens to be the wrong decision, just use it as a learning experience. If it happens to be the right decision and it worked out, kind of remember and record in your mind the situation that went on, and then do it again and frustrate those enemy ships and make them complain in chat that, how are you bouncing all my armor piercing shells? I should have hit your citadel. So another thing about learning game mechanics, becoming a better player just by the simple little things, not having to memorize a bunch of numbers, not having to memorize a bunch of ships, not having to memorize what player is what clan is what. Just a simple thing is, maybe I shouldn't turn away because I'm going to expose my ship more than just staying bow in, or maybe I need to turn away and kite away and use the strength of my ship, speed, surface detectability, to win this engagement, or disengage and re-engage when you want to on your terms. Remember, we are always trying to dictate the terms of the engagements we get into. So like I always say, if that's too much to think about, because it's a lot, there's a lot of things to think about right there. If it's too much to think about, then guess what? It's an entertainment game. Just play it however you want to play it. As long as you're having fun at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Having fun, playing a world of warships, and not turning it into this crazy thought experiment and all these things, or having sticky notes all over your screen. Maybe, I don't know, maybe some of you do that. I hope you don't, because it's a game. It's meant for entertainment. Go out and play the game however it is that is fun for you. And remember, don't turn it into a job. Come and join the World of Warships North American Community Discord. The Discord server is created for the North American community to come together and help each other grow as a community and to become better players. You can find the link to the North American Discord server in the show notes and at the top of the main page of the Warship Tactics website. A few final thoughts. Tier 5 rank is coming. That's right. Wargaming listened. Great. Listening to the community, good for them. They should do it more. I think they do it. They do actually a decent job, in my opinion. But let me list a few ships to think about at Tier 5. Kamikaze, Kamikaze R, Grammy Ashney, Texas, Julius Caesar, October Revolution. All premium ships that are very powerful when they're facing Tier 5 ships only. The Texas, in my opinion, being the weakest of the bunch, unless the CVs make an appearance, and then aircraft carriers of Texas is like, I don't care about your planes. I'll blow them all out of the sky. One of the biggest complaints was and is premium ships in ranked, because not everyone can get them or afford them. They're not accessible to everybody in a tech tree. I personally don't play ranked. In my opinion, it's just small group random battles anyway, with some other rewards that we can mostly get now with coal or steel. I have a feeling those ships I listed will become the focus of complaints about ranked yet again. Remember the Belfast? Same story, different day, different tier. Those of you who played ranked, have fun and good luck in the new shorter version. You're gonna need it. Quick note about the Royal Navy event. I have 2 containers left to get, and I've got no missions for the Royal Navy destroyers. Not one. RNG for life. That's me. HMS Dreadnought. Yes, I will be getting this ship. The namesake of an entire class of ships that is arguably the cause of the most heated arms race in history outside of atomic weapons. Maybe she'll come with Charles E. Madden, her captain, when she joined the fleet. That'd be kind of cool. Come and join my World of Warships live stream at Maddminister Gaming on Facebook on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, midnight UTC. Last thing, torpedoes in the water are nobody's friend. Remember that. Unless they're deep water torpedoes, in that case, destroyers, you know the drill. You're safe. I'm your host, Maddminister, and you've been listening to the Warship Tactics Podcast, where I try to help you improve your World of Warships gameplay. Visit warshiptactics.com to subscribe for new episodes on Mondays. Thank you for listening.